I'm really happy to be here again to see you and be with you here at the C2 service and in the other services as well. This will be my last weekend in August here at Vero, and I have to tell you I have enjoyed it very much and look forward to future times when I am able to come back. A few weeks ago, I was talking on the phone with a good friend of mine in Atlanta. He was enjoying a quiet evening walk. We had known each other for years and years. I even performed his wedding when I was a pastor up there. He had retired from his position at a large university. His soft-spoken and gentle presence was very much loved and respected by his colleagues and students alike. He happens to be a noted author and speaker and a strong advocate for the well-being of children. And also, he happens to be an African American. We were talking about a forthcoming PBS documentary in which he will be a primary spokesperson. It started to rain on his end of the line, and not one of those pleasant little showers, but one of those sudden, monstrous summer downpours that we love so much here in the South. His attitude changed abruptly from relaxed to panicked as he was getting drenched. I asked if there was a store or a bar nearby where he could duck into, but there wasn't. There's a porch, he said, but I'm not going there. No, I asked. Think about it, he said. A black man in the dark with a cell phone in his hand? I don't think so. Years before that, I was talking to another African American friend of mine in Reston, Virginia. He held theology and law degrees from Yale University. He was then our associate conference minister. You'll never guess what happened to me last night, he said. What, I asked. Let's just say you don't want to lock your keys in your car. Or, let's just say you don't ever want to be a black man trying to get his keys from his own locked car at 10:30 p.m. in the parking lot across the street. Or let's just say you don't want to have to be that black man dealing with the police while trying to get his own keys from his own car. It isn't pretty. One more story. Another friend who is African American, this time in Minneapolis. She and her husband happened to be highly educated professionals, and we had worked together for years. Her son is tall and athletic and a great student in school. She's very proud of him. And we were talking, and she said that she feared for his life. What? I said. He's deaf, she said. He can't hear. He's intelligent. He's sensitive. He's kind. He wouldn't hurt a flea. And he loves to run. When he's home, he jogs all the time. And I'm just afraid that one day the police will see him running and yell at him to stop. And because he's deaf, he won't hear the officer, and he'll just keep running. And because he's black, what do you think the officer's going to do? She left that question hanging in the air. In the early 1950s, around the time of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, my father and mother took my sister and me to a tent revival on the outskirts of our town. Now, Mom was a Baptist, but my father, he didn't have much church in him. I'm not sure why we went, probably to please my mom. The evangelist wore a very bright red sports coat, and he paced feverishly across the stage. He waved his Bible as he paced, and he exhorted us to find Jesus. And believe it or not, we did. When they got home, my firefighter father opened all the beers in the refrigerator and poured them down the drain. He didn't have a drinking problem, but he never drank alcohol again. He began some serious praying and Bible study during his downtime at number 4 Fire Hall on Irish Hill. My parents became regular, faithful, even enthusiastic attenders every time St. Luke's Church opened its doors. They dragged me and my sister with them most of the time. The thing is, they didn't become overly self-righteous or pious like a lot of religious folks. My dad had to drop out of high school when he was young to care for his family because his father had passed away. But he soon became a Bible scholar and a Sunday school teacher after that tent meeting. He especially loved the Scofield Bible with its amazing web of interscriptural references. He read the Sword of the Lord religiously, shall we say. He brought home tracts and pamphlets, yet he never became dogmatic or argumentative. He always and genuinely wanted to hear what others had to say. It wasn't long before he was teaching my sister's Sunday school class. He became my scoutmaster of the troop. He sang, he helped cook church dinners, he played his harmonica on demand. He loved all of this, honestly. But you know what? This was not the essence of religion for him. This was icing on the cake. The essence of faith for him was to live the good life. This was the beginning of my education in civility. It was how to live your life in community. It was how to be a channel through which God impacts the world for good. My sister and I learned that money is only an instrument to do God's work on earth. Time, talent, whatever abilities we are given to us, these are given to us to make the world better. On my dad's days off from the fire hall, he would drive for the senior center. He would clean the yards or even paint the houses of people who could no longer do it for themselves. I tagged along, and I came to see how fulfilling this was for him, as well as for those people he helped. I remember one election year when there were 2 men running for sheriff in Berkeley County. Dad came home from the fire hall one day with stickers on both sides of the bumper of his car, one for each candidate. Gibb, people said to him, "You can't do that. You can't vote for both of them." "I guess that's right," he said, "but I like them both. They're both good friends. They're both good men, and either one of them will do a very good job. So why can't a person support both candidates until the election?" Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, Democrats, Republicans, are you listening? After my father had found Jesus, he fell in love with everything in red print in his authorized and marked up copy of the King James Version of the Holy Bible. And especially he loved the Sermon on the Mount. My dad said that God seems to value the poor and the lost and the weak and the meek and the merciful and the peacemakers more than all of those that we think of as successful. Jesus seems to honor and seek out the lepers, the outcasts, the prostitutes, the blind, the deaf, the tax collectors, the victims of an oppressive social order, at least as much as the wealthy and those in high office. Jesus advises us not to seek power or adulation, but to love and serve others. My dad memorized passages about how it is better to be reviled and persecuted, and how Jesus loved the least of these most of all. That last judgment scene in Matthew 25, that was my dad's measurement for good behavior: to feed the hungry, to give clean water to those who need it, to welcome the stranger, to visit and care for the sick, to visit those in prison, to provide clothing to those who need it. To him, this was the good life. This is what civility entailed. Whenever I would get into a spat or an argument, whenever I felt victimized, complained a lot, was angry with someone, he would take me aside. "Buddy," he'd say, quoting Ephesians, "be angry, but sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath." I remember those words from time immemorial. And then he'd ask if I had forgiven 70 times 7. He was especially fond of quoting Proverbs. "If your enemies are hungry, give them bread to eat. If your enemies are thirsty," we're talking about enemies, "give them water to drink, for you will heap coals of fire on their heads." My dad was all about heaping coals of fire. He loved that. It was his style of conflict management. He intuitively saw the strength in gentleness and goodwill. Had my father been born in another time or culture, say in Tibet, we would have said that he was on the path of the Bodhisattva. I want you to hear the Bodhisattva's vow. It's a beautiful, this is a piece of it. "May I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road. For those who wish to go across the water, may I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be a shore for those who yearn for landfall, and a lamp for those who long for light. And for those who need a resting place, a bed, for all who need a servant, may I be a slave. And thus for every single thing that lives in number like the boundless reaches of the sky, may I be their sustenance and nourishment until they pass beyond the bounds of suffering." That's the Bodhisattva vow, part of it, and it's a beautiful ethical guideline. While he may have been a crypto Bodhisattva, he would not have known it. He never would have known that word, but my dad was never a Buddhist, actually. He was a Christian, and he found everything he needed in the Christian Bible. Now you need to know that my mother's side of the family was heavily Klan, as in Ku Klux Klan. There were Klan weddings and Klan meetings and who knows what else. When the uncles and others gathered in our kitchen every Saturday morning, they brought some of that Klan baggage with them. Now, they were also all church folks, even deacons in the local church, the Baptist church. And they claimed to love Jesus. But sometimes, when their talk slipped into politics, oh my, there would be rancor in the air. And I would hear the N-word repeatedly, and words like the Jews and the Catholics spoken with utter disdain. As a child, I had been taught that sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me. But these words felt pretty hurtful. I actually didn't want to be in the same room when they were being used. Not long after that tent meeting, my father began to take on my mother's family in those Saturday morning chats. Oh, he was pleasant enough. He offered them a second cup of coffee, but he dragged them, kicking and screaming, into the Sermon on the Mount, chapter and verse. And he asked them to explain what it means. Ask them to explain what it means to love your neighbor or to love your enemy. He asked them to help him see how they were welcoming the stranger when they rejected Jews and Catholics and blacks and Italians and Poles and so many others. And he got out his Bible and he asked them to show him the verses where hatred and even bigotry were encouraged by Jesus or Paul in that or anywhere else in that whole biblical narrative. Of course, he would say, there is a place for anger, even outrage. But when they denounced civil rights demonstrations, he pointed out that even Jesus had caused a ruckus in the temple. Jesus had some pretty harsh words for people who deceived or oppressed other people. My parents did more than talk. During the height of the Iranian hostage crisis, they invited an Iranian Muslim Shia family to celebrate Thanksgiving with them, thus earning the opprobrium of their neighbors. On another occasion, my father got our church to share a Sunday night service exchange with a local African American Baptist church. Imagine coming to that church, St. Luke's, and seeing a third of the sanctuary filled with black people. "Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine," exclaimed my father when he saw that crowd. And imagine his sheer delight when our church returned the favor. Now, as our societies become more diverse, constructing civility among us becomes a more urgent task. But the building blocks for a more civil life exist already within all of our various cultures and faith traditions. We will become more civil as we become more humane. And we will become more humane as we discover that we are really one big, very diverse family inhabiting this one planetary home. This past January, Shakespearean scholar Jim Marino was asked to speak about civility on Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. He observed that Dr. King never wrote his enemies off. He never dehumanized them. Even when facing the worst mobs, he was acutely aware that the people in that mob were human beings, people with moral selves, people deserving of love. It wasn't just about winning for King, but about reaching another human soul. Nothing can be more civil than that, really, to confront one's enemies without fear while attempting to hasten their redemption. Well, in his own untutored way, I like to think that my father was like that. He didn't organize demonstrations. He didn't give great speeches. He didn't publish books, but he walked the talk of the Christian faith. In a brilliant New York Times article in June, another professor, Thomas Segura, called civility an age-old, misguided obsession of white America. What did he mean by that? Well, when we white people insist on people being civil, we usually mean other people, not us. People we see on the screen, not us. And we mistake civility for being nice, for being non-confrontational. We just want them to be nice because we think we already are. We want them to conform to our standards and not disturb us or threaten that which makes us comfortable. But actually, he said, this insistence reveals how often we are more concerned with order rather than with justice, with the absence of tension than with the righting of hurtful wrongs. Public civility reflects a deeply mutual and moral concern at its best. This is what Professor Richard Parks wrote in a book just published this month. Civility embodies the attitudes and affirmations and actions that are consistent with the building blocks, really, of a just and peaceable common public life. A recent poll found that 91% of Americans think that a lack of civility is a serious problem. Probably 91% of us in this room think that too. It's gotten so bad that many of us even protect our children from the news in the evenings because so much of our political and public discourse has become so toxic. Isn't it time we get to a place of deeply mutual and moral caring? But how do we get there, you ask? I will leave you with this very sage advice from my very wise father, the firefighter, and he got it from the Bible. We will get there when we begin to practice what we read in Proverbs. If your enemy is hungry, feed him, feed her. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. And when you do this, you heap coals of fire upon their heads. How civil is that? Amen.